Today's topic is physique inflation, which a lot of creators have recently talked about. And since I think most of them are completely wrong about the subject, I'm going to give my opinion on the matter. Before we get into that, though, some of you might be wondering what the fuck happened to my hair. I made the mistake of going to a barber 2 days ago, and I told the guy, please cut off the tips of my hair. And what he went ahead and did is cut me some finance bro fucking surfer mullet or whatever the fuck this is supposed to be. I did not end up paying the guy because, I mean, what the fuck is this? But it is what it is. It is just hair, and within like 6 months or so, this is probably going to have grown out into something a little less absurd. I do have good hair growth genetics, so in a year or so, my hair will probably be back for the most part. That being said, let's get into physique inflation. So before we talk about the takes of other creators, let's first talk about, establish what physique inflation actually is. Most of you probably already know, but some might not. Physique inflation describes the trend, mostly on social media, but to an extent also in real life, of the bodies you might see, the bodies that people are showing to others, the physiques, becoming more and more impressive, more and more extreme, more shredded, more muscular. In the case of women, maybe more perfectly shaped, voluptuous, but also not fat, etc. So, of course, this depends on whether or not we're talking about women or men. As always, I'm mainly going to be focused on men in this video, but most of what I'm going to say is also going to apply to physique inflation as it relates to women. And essentially what this does, we're going to talk about to what extent it's real or not later on. But for now, what this inflation of the physiques that are around, and especially the physiques you see, does is it creates a much higher, an inflated standard of what the average physique is and what an impressive physique is. Now, the take that I've seen a lot of creators have on this topic is that physique inflation is kind of a bad thing. Why? Because it means that even people who work relatively hard, who do train decently, to a decent extent, will be called mid or not that impressive, or do you even lift on the internet? And a lot of this obviously depends on angles, on lighting. You can also edit pictures, etc. But yeah, just uploading an unedited photo of what you look like, if you've been lifting for a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, you're probably going to get shit on the internet. And I understand why this might seem like a bad thing at face value, right? When you first look at it. Now, the Pioneer very recently uploaded a video on this same topic where he takes a little bit of a different approach to it. His take was that you don't need to compare yourself to these people in the first place. Right? No one is forcing you to set people on the internet as your standard. And what he pointed to, in addition to just physique inflation in the more visual aesthetic sense, is that there's also like teenagers out there performing incredible acts of strength on certain lifts, bench press, squat, whatever. So it's not just about the physique, it's also about the performance. There's also kind of a performance inflation. But the question still remains, do you need to compare yourself to these people? And Pioneer guy, I don't know what his name is, or slipped my mind, he essentially says, no, you should be comparing yourself to yourself, right? To your prior version, if you will, to the old version of you, the past version of you that wasn't training as hard or was training as hard but hadn't gone as far. And that's how you should measure your progress. And this is sort of a more wholesome, less black-pilled take on the topic. Because a lot of people who say, oh, the standards have risen so much, they will also go on to argue based on that position, why should I even lift? Why should I even train in the first place? If I'm not going to measure up to other people, what's the point? And the Pioneer also argues that you're not actually competing with these people, or very rarely are you competing with these people, because obviously social media promotes very extreme content. So you're going to see the most impressive, the most absurd physiques, the most crazy, displays of strength or whatever other type of attribute you want to talk about. That's not actually a reflection of the real world population, wherever you may live, right? In some countries, people might be stronger and more impressive on average than in others, but in no country is the average person as jacked as the average physique is on Instagram. And so even if you're just decently in shape, decently strong, you're probably going to be a fairly impressive individual in your actual real world social circle. And I can absolutely attest to this fact, right? If I look around me in real life, there are not a lot of people I actually compete with on an athletic level. There are maybe a handful of people who might be of similar strength, but they aren't as fit as me. There are people who maybe have somewhat better stamina than me, but are worse in every other category of fitness. So overall, I am definitely one of, if not the fittest person I personally know. Despite the fact that, compared to people on Instagram or whatever other platform you want to look at, I am pretty bang average as far as fitness content goes, probably. Here's the thing, though. The question is not, should you compare yourself to other people? The question is, what do you want to achieve? See, the Pioneer's position, in my opinion, is a more positive, a more optimistic one than the sort of black-pilled outlook of what's the point of even lifting anymore. But in my opinion, it still misses the mark, because instead of saying physique inflation is a good thing, it says physique inflation actually doesn't matter and you shouldn't look at other people. You don't need to compare yourself to others. Why? I'm going to go ahead and give you guys an example that's going to illustrate the point I'm about to make and the position I hold in regards to this whole topic. As some of you already know, I have a brother, and my brother is significantly younger than me. In fact, he's a whole decade younger than me. This means that We are not, immediately competing with each other or immediately comparable to each other as brothers who are of a more similar age might be. However, I do have a pretty good memory, so I can very well compare him to earlier versions of myself, the way I myself performed when I was the given age he is at, right? Now, there are those who would be mad if their younger sibling is more impressive than they were at things that they care about. In my case, say fitness, right? Although that is an understatement because I care about almost every metric that makes me more impressive as a man. My brother is very gifted in certain aspects of fitness. I would say I've always been a little bit more bulky than he is, a little bit more jacked. But in terms of agility, hand-eye coordination, that type of stuff, he just has a natural gift. He's an absolute natural. In fact, on my Instagram, I think there are some earlier parkour videos of us doing parkour together where the kid was like 11, 12, and I would show him a move that I had learned at some point, probably as a teenager as well. I would show it to him once, twice, maybe 3 times, and then he would go ahead and try it and instantly manage to do it. And in fact, not just instantly manage to do it, he would do it very sort of smoothly, aesthetically almost. Like he had this natural sort of rhythm, this dance to him. Again, some might see that shit and be bothered by it, thinking, this guy is essentially like an upgraded version of me. What the fuck is this, right? I've been dealt a bad hand. Not so with me. In fact, once I realized this stuff, I started trying to really push my brother's gifts, offering my help where I could in regards to training, my advice. Obviously, I'm much more experienced, much more knowledgeable on the topic of training, lifting weights. I'm also more skilled as a martial artist. My brother has gotten into a martial art himself. And where I can, I offer my assistance to help him capitalize on his gifts. Now you might say, well, that's normal, right? You love your brother, you want him to succeed. But that's actually not it. Or, of course, that plays into it, but that's not the key point. I could love my brother and just spend time with him, right? Why am I so interested in bringing out his natural gifts, in enhancing his performance that is already there? One of the reasons why I care about this is because I am competing with my brother. Now, this might sound confusing. Why am I helping someone I do feel like competing with become more and more impressive? Because it forces me to push myself harder. If my brother is more impressive than I was at his age, that means I have to work harder now to maintain my position of physical superiority. Because, of course, in a few years, he's going to hit his physical prime. And the question is, am I still going to be able to, kick his ass when we're wrestling or outperform him on some type of lift or whatever we're talking about, right? And if I want to do that, I will have to work hard. Now, if I was a coward, if I was a weakling, I would not help him capitalize on his natural born gifts, or I would even try to kind of hinder him, put him down, tell him he's a loser. Because that would make it easier for me to stay on top, right? To stay in my superior position as the big, strong brother for the rest of my life. But that's not what I want. I want him to have all the advantages in the world that he can have to capitalize on his gifts and still compete against him. Because that way I'm going to have the hardest challenge possible. And even if I fail to compete with him, even if he surpasses me in physical prowess, I will still have worked way harder to try to measure up, to try to stay on top, than I would have if I had put him down. So essentially, what I'm talking about here is raising the bar in terms of your competition, in terms of performance as a whole, because that means the bar I have to reach, I have to get over, becomes higher, and I'm going to work harder. And even if I don't get over the bar, even if I don't measure up to the standard, I will still be superior than I was before, factually speaking. And this is the difference between my position and the positions I mentioned before. The positions I mentioned before are based on your subjective feeling. You want to feel bad about physique inflation because it means you have to work harder to be impressive in this world. When the reality is, physique inflation, if you still want to compete, if you still want to go places, actually forces you to be more impressive, to get closer to excellence than before, to compete. Physique inflation, yes, makes it harder for you to stand out. But the question is, are you going to let that deter you from working out, or are you going to work harder to still reach something of significance? And in the end, be a way more impressive human than if you had competed against the average physique 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Again, you might say, how is the pioneer wrong, right? You don't have to compare yourself to other people. There's no inherent necessity for it, right? And I do think if you're looking at your progress, there is a lot of value in mainly looking at prior versions of yourself, comparing to that. However, whether you choose to actively, constantly compare yourself to other people or not, if you are not living on some distant mountain somewhere in the middle of nowhere, if you're not a fucking hermit, okay, you will be around people. And even if you don't consciously compare yourself to them, you're still a human. Subconsciously, you will compare yourself to those people. And you will be compared to them by the outside world. This whole idea of, being all nice to everyone and we don't have to compete, we can all just live our little life for ourselves, that is only true to an extent. What I mean by that is if you actually strive for excellence, if you actually want to achieve something of greatness in any field, this doesn't have to be fitness, this can be any part of life, the number of people that you're competing with, but more importantly, the resources available, the positions available, the opportunities available will shrink substantially. And suddenly there's not this big, wide world and all of these different people and all of these options and opportunities. Suddenly what you have is a relatively clear goal, a very limited number of ways to reach it, and a very specific group of people that you do very much have to compete with for those opportunities, for those resources, for those job openings, whatever. On the most fundamental level, if you're trying to find a partner in life and create a family, you are competing with every other person of your sex. As a man, if you are looking for a good woman to have children with, to have a family with, right, to create a future with, depending on the actual standards you have, right, the higher quality the woman you're looking for, chances are you're competing with like 80, 90% of men. Now, of course, not all of those men are going to meet the same exact women as you. But the higher quality the woman you're going for, the higher the standards you set for the partner you want in your life, the more men are also going to want that woman and the more eyes are going to be on her. And the same thing goes for women, of course. If you want like a top tier man in your life to have children with, create a family with, you're going to be competing for that guy with a lot of women. And what does competing mean? Well, if a top tier guy is looking for a top tier woman, they both have their standards. They both have their ideas of what they want in a partner. And the question is, do you measure up to those standards yourself? Not compared to your former self, not compared to some, hypothetical version of you that might exist in the future. Compared to other people, what do you actually have to offer this high quality, awesome partner that you are looking for? Because of course you can settle for someone. But if you really want the woman of your dreams or the man of your dreams, and I say that with a little bit of a wink because I think there's a lot of great women and a lot of great men out there. But if you want someone who checks a lot of boxes for you, and not in a literal sense, not in a I have a list sense, more in a this is a really, really awesome person that has a lot of virtues, that has a lot to offer as a partner kind of sense. If that's what you want, I think this is a good example because a lot of people want a partner and, want to create a family. If that's what you want, you are competing with other people. And maybe not specifically in the domain of fitness, but in the domain of being a high quality man overall, or again, high quality woman. The same thing to an extent goes for fitness. Of course, you can say, oh, I don't really care about comparing myself to others. And that might sound nice, but is it really true? Is it really true that you, who's working out maybe not 3 times a week, maybe more like 5 times, 6 times a week, working hard, training hard, going on runs in the cold and the dark, Is it really true that you don't care about the way you compare to others? I doubt it. And you know what? There's nothing fucking wrong with it. What I realized very recently is the reason why I have really upped my game when it comes to fitness, but also to several other aspects of my life over the last couple of years, is that I have stopped comparing myself to the people around me immediately. But more importantly, I've stopped saying, it's okay to be this, it's okay to be that. I don't care what other people are like. I don't care what the standards are. And I've very actively started comparing myself to the strength standards, the agility standards, the speed standards, the stamina standards of actual impressive people. Because comparison is a good thing if you have a pair of balls. If you're not going to sit down in a corner and whimper about the fact that other people are more impressive than you. The fact that other people are more impressive than me just means I have to work harder. In fact, seeing people who are not on steroids, who are incredibly impressive in terms of strength, in terms of the body they've built, in terms of what they're able to do in the world of calisthenics, for example, few things have been as motivating to me because I see these people and I think to myself, that could be me. I've just been a little bit of a pussy about working out. And I bet the types of people who say, oh, you don't have to compare yourself to others. In fact, I know some of these people are nowhere near as impressive as I am physically and don't work nearly as hard. So stop trying to talk the world into some absurd utopia that doesn't exist, where you always feel good and everything is all love and sunshine. That's not real. In the real world, yes, you do compete with other people, or you choose not to compete, and you're going to have some very mediocre or maybe even subpar life. And that's what some people want. Actually, I don't think that's what anyone really wants, but that's what some people choose. I guess it is what it is. But if you want to strive for excellence, if you have that drive to do something great, to achieve greatness, to hone your craft, to surpass yourself and others, if you have that within you, the way I do, then don't listen to this lovey-dovey advice about physique inflation. Compare yourself to others. Don't compare yourself to some absurd guy, some monster on steroids, maybe, if that's not what you want to be. But do be aware of the fact that these people exist, that they are extremely strong. That's something to keep in mind. They are a part of reality. They are a part of the world of strength. I would never recommend to anyone to take steroids. In fact, I made a whole video on why taking steroids is pretty fucking stupid, in my opinion. But that doesn't change the fact that I accept the fact and am aware of the fact that these people exist and what they are capable of. Stop coping, stop denying the real world. Impressive individuals are out there. And if you do have the balls to compare yourself to them, you may never measure up to their exact performance, to their exact physique. but you will become a whole lot more impressive than you would if you just, existed in your little cave of delusion. That's going to be it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, learned something, maybe found it inspiring, hopefully found it inspiring, actually. If you did, go ahead and leave a like, or if you were just entertained by this ugly ass haircut, drop a like. Go ahead and leave a comment if you have any questions about what I talked about, suggestions for future videos, or if you just want to help the algorithm. You can also go ahead and hit me up on Instagram, especially if you're interested in a personalized training program and or fitness coaching. Just go over there, hit me up in the DMs, and we'll see what we can do, what your goals are, etc. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to see more videos of mine. I make fitness content on general health occasionally, and I also make more philosophical videos. So if that's something you enjoy, that's something you're interested in, you want to learn about, go ahead and subscribe and activate the notification bell, as always, if you want notifications. I'm going to leave it at that. See you guys in the next one, and until then, have a good one.